She came to him asking for a child, but what she really took was his peace. Elias Monroe had built his life out of silence. 3 years of it. No neighbors, no laughter, no noise, but the wind scraping through dry grass and the low groan of the windmill that hadn't worked right since winter. He liked it that way, or at least he told himself he did, until the morning she appeared on horseback, framed by the rising sun and a wall of dust. Her name was Nara, Apache blood in her veins, fire in her eyes, and grief behind both. She didn't smile, didn't introduce herself, just looked straight at him as if she already knew the shape of his loneliness and said, "I need a child from you." The words didn't sound like a request. They sounded like a sentence, one that would change both their fates. Elias stood frozen beside his half-mended fence, the hammer slipping from his hand into the dirt. He wanted to laugh, to shout, to demand why him, but her gaze didn't waver. It carried the kind of sorrow that made mockery impossible. That evening, he tried to forget her. He tried to go back to the quiet, but when the wind rose and the door shuddered on its hinges, he thought he heard her voice again, calm, certain, inevitable. Tomorrow, she would return for his answer, and whatever he said would decide which of them survived the next storm. The Monroe homestead sat alone on the rim of the New Mexico desert, a half-rotted cabin surrounded by nothing but wind, dust, and the slow decay of everything that had once mattered. The land stretched for miles in every direction, barren, sun-bitten, and silent. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort. It accused. Elias had once worn a blue uniform, carried a rifle, and believed in things like honor and victory. Those words had turned to ghosts after the war. He'd come here to disappear, to bury the noise of gunfire and screams beneath the rhythm of daily chores, fixing fences, hauling water, feeding the horse that barely moved anymore. It wasn't living, but it was steady. At night, he'd sit by the stove, stare at the warped boards above his head, and count the cracks spreading like veins through the ceiling. Every creak reminded him of what was gone, his family, his regiment, his faith in anything larger than the land he stood on. The townsfolk called him the quiet farmer, as if silence were a kind of sickness. Maybe it was. But since that morning, silence felt different, no longer a shield, but a punishment. He'd seen her eyes once, and somehow they followed him through the day. Fierce, desperate, impossible to forget. He told himself she wouldn't come back. That women like her belonged to stories whispered in saloons, not to broken men living among dust and ghosts. Yet as the evening light turned the desert red and the air stilled before nightfall, Elias felt something shift, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for a promise he hadn't made. And in that quiet, he knew, she would return. She returned the next morning, just as the horizon bled into gold. No sound of approach, only the sudden presence of movement where there had been none. Nara rode slowly this time, her horse coated with dust, her dark braid whipping in the wind like a warning flag. Elias froze on the porch, hands still gripping the tin cup that had long since gone cold. She dismounted without a word, her boots sinking into the sand. There was no hesitation in her step, no shyness in her gaze. She looked at him as though they'd already had a lifetime of conversations. "You didn't sleep," she said, not asking. He didn't answer, couldn't. His throat had gone dry as the desert around them. Nara walked closer, her voice steady, deliberate. "My people are breaking apart. The land that once fed us is gone. The ones who remember our songs are dying. I need a child who carries both worlds in their blood, Apache and white. The old ways and the new." Elias tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "You think I'm the answer to that? You're the only man I've seen who doesn't hurt what he fears." The words landed heavy, striking something deep he thought long buried. She studied him a moment longer, then added softly, "If I choose wrong, the council will bind me to Talon. He's strong enough to kill what he can't control. But I won't bring life into that kind of strength." She turned to mount her horse, pausing only once. "The full moon rises in 6 days. That's how long you have to decide." Elias watched her ride into the sun until she vanished, and his world felt unbearably small without her in it. The sun lifted slow and merciless, turning the land into hammered copper. Elias worked until sweat ran into his eyes and the salt stung, because motion was the only way he knew to keep from thinking. He mended fence wire that didn't need mending, tightened gate latches twice, then stood staring at his roof as if the boards might fix themselves if glared at hard enough. He could almost hear her voice in the frying stillness. The full moon rises in 6 days. By mid-morning the wind changed, no longer a breeze that flirted with dust, but a long, steady breath drawn from far-off ruin. The light went strange, bright and flat, like a knife's edge. He felt the warning crawl over his skin, the way men feel a horse tense before it bolts. Sandstorm, his mind said. A bad one. He grabbed the water pail and headed for the corral. The old mare, Juniper, stood with her head low, tail flicking miserably as grains of grit peppered her flanks. He stroked her neck with a slow hand, thawing a little as she leaned into the touch. "All right, girl," he murmured. "We'll ride it out." He said it as much for himself as for her. He was hauling a second bucket when he saw the rider come out of the light. For a heartbeat he thought it was a desert trick, a figure shaped by heat and want. Then the mirage resolved into Nara, braid whipped to one side, a scarf tied across her mouth and nose. She swung down before her horse had stopped moving, and threw him a look he felt in his bones. "You waited too long on the roof," she said, voice muffled by the scarf. "I was getting to it," he said, and even he heard the lie. She surveyed the boards with one glance and shook her head. "You have an hour, maybe less." He swallowed. Heights prickled his spine like a bad memory. He'd rather face a rifle barrel than climb something that swayed. Nara didn't soften. "Your house lives or dies with your choices. So do you." He held her gaze and found himself nodding. Then he fetched the ladder. It shuddered when he set it against the eaves. Elias tested the first rung with his boot as the wind tugged at his shirt. He could feel the storm brewing like a throb in his temples, deep and relentless. He climbed anyway. At the top, he crouched low, fingers hooking under warped shingles. The rot was worse than he'd admitted. 3 boards soft as bread, 2 split where last winter's freeze had pried them apart. "Work from the leeward side," Nara called up, eyes narrowed, assessing the sky. "Nails in your teeth, boards across your lap. Don't stand unless you must." He did as told, the old soldier in him sliding into obedience with guilty relief. He pried the first board and nearly pitched sideways when the wind gusted. The ladder rattled, his stomach lurched. From below he felt, more than saw. Nara stepped close and lay one hand on the ladder's side. Not holding it, anchoring him. "You're safe," she said, simple as a fact. "Look at what you're doing, not where you could fall." He breathed through a surge of panic sharp enough to taste. He could. He did. He focused on the crooked nail head under his pry bar, the dull creak of wood surrendering to purpose, the rasp of his breath. Board by board, he made the ruin honest. He measured by knuckle and eye, set replacements, hammered until his shoulder burned. Sweat stung his lashes. Sand grated in his teeth. The wind climbed. It came with a low moan like something thinking about grief. The horizon browned, and a wall of airborne dirt shouldered toward them, polite no longer. Elias hurried and made mistakes. Twice he set a board wrong and had to pry it back out. Nara didn't scold. She steadied the ladder when it bucked, handed up nails without being asked, and spoke only when his hands trembled so hard he could barely grip the hammer. "You're doing it," she said. "Not good job. Not almost there." A clear, bare truth. "You're doing it." He drove the last nail with a blow that felt like throwing a punch at his own fear. His arms shook with the effort. He clambered down fast and hit the ground just as the storm arrived in full, tens of thousands of fists of sand slamming into the world. They ran for the door, heads bowed, and the gale tried to spit them back out. Nara shouldered the door closed, while Elias dropped the bar. For a moment they simply stood inside, chest to chest with the wind as dust hissed against the boards like rain. Silence was gone. The storm filled every space. The cabin breathed and flexed around them. The roof thrummed with impacts. Elias waited for the first trickle of dust along the rafters, the telltale sift that meant he had failed. It didn't come. The roof held. Something unclenched in his chest with almost painful relief. He turned and found Nara watching him, eyes shining not with softness, but with that fierce, measuring attention that had unsettled him from the first. He realized she was damp with sweat and grit, that her scarf had left a pale band across her cheeks, that the line of concentration between her brows had finally eased. "You acted," she said, I was terrified, he said. Being terrified and moving anyway is the definition of brave. She studied him a beat longer, and her voice cooled. Remember that when men try to name you weak. The storm battered the cabin until midday, then sagged into angry gusts. They sat at the small table across a tin cup and a cracked plate with jerky on it. Elias tore a piece and found his mouth too dry to swallow. Nara tugged the scarf from her neck and drank slow from the dipper, then poured water into a second tin and slid it across. He traced the rim with a thumb, buying time. Why 6 days? The council meets on the 7th, she said. They will say what they always say. Pragmatic words that hide old vows and old fears. They will talk of safety as if safety is obedience, and obedience is life. She tilted her head. They will tell me to accept Talon. You could go anyway, Elias said, hating how it sounded. Coward advice dressed as kindness. And be chased for the insult? Nara's mouth shaped a humorless smile. They could not catch me. Talon might. But that is not why I won't run. My people are losing their language one word at a time. If I leave, the ones who argued for mercy will be the first to stop speaking. A child must anchor more than a cradle. He didn't understand all of it. He understood enough to feel the weight of it pull his shoulders down. Elias had been in rooms where men discussed survival with neat maps and cold arithmetic. Every time, the numbers seemed to forget the people they stood for. What if we fail? He asked, hating the smallness in his voice. Then we fail trying to be kind, she said. I can live with that. They ate. The storm prowled around the cabin, testing seams with sly fingers, looking for weakness and finding new respect. Time went strange in the dim light, as if every minute stretched to hold more thought. Nara's eyes moved across his walls like a scout. She paused on the photograph nailed near the stove. A vivid thing once, now bleached. A woman with clever hands and tired eyes. A boy with a cap too big for his head. Your mother, Nara said. Not a question. Yes, he said, voice rough. And me. How did she die? Elias had not spoken the story aloud in years. He told it without embroidery. The winter sickness. The ride to town too late. The way sound had changed when he came back to a room that no longer had her in it. After that, the blue coat and the screaming, and afterward, the farm he could share with nobody. He did not tell her about the nights that smelled like smoke, even when there had been no fire. He did not need to. She sat across from him and listened the way patients listen for their own breath on a cold night, hoping it will frost the air. My mother lived, Nara said finally. Mostly. Her gaze shifted somewhere he couldn't see. She chose a white soldier when she was a girl. He taught her 2 languages, and forgot to teach her how to be safe in either. When he left, she kept his words and wore them like a shawl long after they stopped warming her. Her palm flattened on the table. Men like Talon call that betrayal. I call it survival. And I have room for both truths. He realized what she was telling him. That choosing him would stitch loose threads back into a cloth that had never fit right, and might also tear it. He thought of the ladder under his hands, the way fear had not vanished, but been asked to move aside so work could happen. Maybe this was the same shape, only larger. By mid-afternoon, the storm broke into ragged spits. Like an old man spitting curses, he no longer had breath to shout. Light bled under the door. Elias unbarred it and stepped into a world that had been rasped clean. The sky was a brittle blue. Dunes had shifted 3 feet. The windmill had lost a vane. The trough lay on its side like a felled animal. But the house stood, and the roof held, and that felt like a thing a man could stand on. Nara stepped out behind him, eyes scanning the horizon with a hunter's economy. They'll have used the storm, she said quietly. He turned. Who? Men who like to arrive when others are tired. She nodded toward the north ridge. Talon thinks a test proves worth. He does not understand that tests reveal character. She looked at Elias. What did your tests reveal today? That I hate ladders, he said, too quick. And the attempt at levity died between them. He tried again. That I can do a thing I'm afraid of if someone stands at the bottom and says I'm safe. Nara's face softened at the edges. Good, she said. Remember that. Because there are tests no one can steady for you. They spent the rest of the afternoon repairing what the storm had broken. He set the trough upright. She hammered the windmill's bent metal flat against a stump. then climbed as naturally as a cat to reattach the vein. Elias forced himself to watch without flinching, respecting her competence instead of fearing it. When she came down, hands black with grease, she accepted his canteen and drank like someone who had learned to love water late. "Why me?" he asked again, the question worn smooth from tumbling in his mouth. Nara wiped her fingers on a rag. "I watched you give water to a stray colt that broke from a wild band," she said. "You spoke to it as if words could teach a throat to swallow. Loud men do not talk that way. You were watching me?" He heard how small and trespassed that sounded, and pushed past it to something truer. "For how long?" "Long enough to see that you fix more than you break," she said. "Long enough to see you choose repair over rage." The sun sank lower. Heat bled from the ground. From the ridge, a hawk scribbled invisible signs. Elias stood with his hands on his hips, and felt a strange rightness settle into his muscles, this simple fatigue of work, done with purpose and not just to run from thought. He had almost forgotten it existed. Inside, he lit the lamp early. Dusk makes a man honest or mean, he thought. And he wanted light to weigh the choice. Nara drifted through his small room like a tide, touching nothing, changing everything. She sat on the floor and unbound her braid, combed it with her fingers, then bound it again. It looked like prayer. "How does courage feel to you?" she asked, surprising him. "Like my chest is too small for my heartbeat," he said. He waited for her to smile at the awkwardness. She didn't. She nodded, as if he'd named a constellation and put it in her hand. "Good," she said. "If you become comfortable, you're either lying to yourself or you've learned the wrong lesson." 1. They talked until the lamp burned low. He told her about the first time he had fired on a man who never saw him. She told him about the winter her people tried to live on stored corn that had molded, and how the children went quiet in ways silence should never be. She did not weep when she said it. He did not when he answered. The room held both griefs without cracking. When the wick guttered, he rose to pinch it, and then froze, hand hovering in air. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was the absence of wind registering as a new kind of noise, and under it, the faint, rhythmic tremor of hooves traveling with purpose. Nara's head turned toward the door. Her voice went calm. "Riders." The word didn't carry fear, it carried math. Elias set the lamp down and crossed to the window. The night had not yet taken the sky. A rune of dust drifted along the north ridge, shallow and controlled. Not a storm's doing then. 2, maybe 3 horses. No lanterns. They moved like men who believed the land belonged to them. Elias's mouth went dry again. He looked at the rifle hung on pegs beneath his mother's photograph. His hand lifted and hesitated. He could take it down, load, set it on the table so its weight could argue for him. Or he could leave it where it was, and let the argument be himself. Nara's gaze followed his. "Do you shoot?" she asked. "Yes. Would you?" "If I had to." He waited for judgment. None came. "Good," she said. "But that is not tonight." She stepped to the door and rested her palm on it like a woman listening to the heartbeat of a house. "Talon will not test you with bullets first. He wants to taste your fear. He wants to make me despise it." Elias thought about the latter, about standing not because he was fearless, but because he chose not to climb down. He nodded, as if something invisible had sent him orders. "Sit," Nara said, and the command flattened every nerve in him. Saturday. She took the chair opposite. They faced each other across a rough board table and a room haywired with their breaths. Hooves slowed, stopped. A man's silhouette crossed the window, blocking the last smear of light. Elias saw broad shoulders, hair bound at the nape, a head that turned to measure angles. 2 smaller shapes waited back near the well flankers, not cowards. Nara's pupils widened and then settled. He wondered if she heard the same small, furious choir in her ribs that he did in his. Knuckles rapped once on the wood soft, almost polite. "Do I open it?" Elias asked. "No," she said. "Not yet." The pause stretched until the knock came again, louder this time, the soft gone out of it. A voice followed, wrapped in the kind of English that had been learned late and sharpened on necessity. "Nara," the man said. "Come out." She didn't move. "Talon." He took his time answering, and Elias had the absurd thought that the man smiled in the dark, full of his name. "You have made the council whisper," Talon said. "That is a kind of power. I would like you to spend it more wisely." Nara's hand found the edge of the table and pressed there until her knuckles whitened. She did not raise her voice. "The last time you spoke of wisdom, you meant obedience," she said. "That is not the same word." Elias realized he was breathing too fast. He slowed it, counting skips. He did not stand, so Talon would not have the pleasure of his nerves in his legs. He let the chair hold him and kept his hands open on the boards. Talon's boots scraped as he shifted his weight. "Open the door," he said, "so I can see the one you prefer to me." Elias glanced at Nara. She nodded once. He rose, lifted the bar, and pulled the door wide. Talon filled the threshold like a truth a man doesn't want. He was not large the way tavern talk makes brutes. He was the kind of compact that wastes nothing. His eyes were clear and measuring. When they landed on Elias, they did not flicker. "So," he said, one syllable containing appraisal and dismissal in equal parts. Elias inclined his head. "Evening." The other man's mouth tilted, not a smile. "He is polite," Talon said to Nara without looking away from Elias. "This is what you want? Manners?" He stepped in, past the lintel, and only then did Elias see the long, pale scar notched across Talon's forearm, a story told in tissue. He carried no rifle. His hands were empty. That felt worse. "They will talk," Talon said conversationally, pacing the edges of the room like a man testing fence posts. "About a woman who chose a man who does not make the ground shake. They will say you mistook quiet for goodness." "I did not mistake anything," Nara said. "I chose." Talon stopped. He turned until all his attention became a single line running from his eyes to Elias's. "Then let him choose too," he said. "Let him choose to stand still while I raise my hand." "Oeth." Nara's breath hitched. "Talon." He didn't lift his gaze off Elias. "No blows," he said. "Not tonight. Just the test. Do you run from the shadow of pain, or do you watch it come and decide for yourself what it means?" Elias heard himself answer from that careful blank place the army had built in him. "All right." The room shrank to this. A table between two men, a woman who refused to look away, a door yawning to the cooling dusk. Talon stepped closer until the air between them felt like a drumhead. He raised his hand slowly, palm open, then curled it into a fist with that same terrible leisure. He drew it back, as if pulling a string that connected to the past. Elias did not close his eyes. He watched the hand come until it stopped an inch from his face. Not a blow, a fact, a question in the shape of violence. His heart tried to break his ribs to get out. He thought of the latter, of Nara's voice under the storm, of the photograph on the wall and the boy in the cap too big for him, who had survived men, shouting because he learned how to be quiet and keep moving. He kept his gaze steady. He did not flinch. Talon's fist hovered, trembled, lowered. The breath he took sounded like he had pulled a thorn from his own foot. Something unreadable crossed his face. Not respect, not approval recognition, like finding a track in the dust that should not be there, and choosing to follow it anyway. He turned to Nara. "Tomorrow," he said, "council or not, I will come back with words from the old ones. Hear them." He paused, then added, almost gently to Elias, "Do not bring a rifle to that." He tilted his chin toward the pegs under the photograph. "It will make you smaller." He stepped back into the doorway, the dusk waist-deep around his legs. "Sleep," he said to Nara, in their language now, something like a benediction sharpened into a warning. He left. The two shadows near the well peeled off and followed. Elias stood there with the door open until the dark swallowed the last shape. When he finally shut it, the cabin's sudden stillness felt louder than the storm had. He set the bar and found Nara watching him, as if he had done something he didn't understand. "You didn't flinch," she said, and her voice thinned, as if some tight thing inside her had been cut free. "I wanted to," he said. "That means it counted." They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The space between them thrummed with a new gravity. Every breath from here would be measured against this moment. Every choice, too. Outside, the wind moved the sand in low hisses, rewriting small maps. Somewhere a night bird called once and thought better of it. Elias looked at the pegs under his mother's photograph. The rifle hung there, a neat geometry of wood and iron that had once turned intention into ending. He decided to let it stay a symbol one more night. Nara stepped to the window and peered toward the north ridge. Her silhouette cut the last pale light into two honest halves. "It will be harder," she said softly. "I know," he said. "Men who mistake noise for strength do not forgive being shown wrong." "I know," he said again, and found the truth living in the words like a heartbeat in a wrist. "I'll stand anyway." She turned from the window and, after a long breath, nodded as if an oath had been offered and accepted. In the corner, the lamplight found the edges of a beaded bracelet she now wore around her wrist, and the colors woke quietly, like small stars at dawn. Tomorrow, Talon would bring the council's judgment like weather. Tomorrow, names would be said out loud, and consequences would arrive wearing boots. Tonight, in this room built out of scarwood and stubbornness, two people carried a storm they had chosen on purpose. "Rest," Nara said. "You'll need it." Note: Elias thought of sleep and knew it wouldn't come. He sat with his back to the cool wall, listening to her braid loosen and loosen again, and let the shape of the coming fight settle into him. Not bullets first, maybe not ever. What he'd have to lift would be heavier than iron. What he'd have to hold would be more fragile than skin. He closed his eyes and steadied his breathing. When the moon rose, thin and honest, its light slid through the seam in the shutter and laid a pale bar across the table where his open hands rested, as if measuring them for the work to come. The morning came pale and strange, as if the world had forgotten its own colors. The desert was hushed, no birds, no wind, only the dry creak of boards expanding in the heat. Elias hadn't slept. He'd sat in the corner all night, half expecting the door to rattle, the hoofbeats to return, the storm to break again, but none did. When he finally rose, the light was already slicing through the shutters. The air carried a stillness that meant something was coming. He looked toward the horizon and saw them. 5 riders, not 3 this time, their shapes breaking the wavering line of the dunes. Nara was already outside, her braid tied tight, the long knife at her hip gleaming dull in the light. She'd been waiting, like she'd known to the minute when they'd arrive. Elias stepped onto the porch beside her. "Talon." She nodded. "And the council." He swallowed. "What are they here for?" She looked at him then, not with fear, but with that same calm that made his pulse stutter. "To decide whether I am still one of them, or already one of you." The riders came fast, kicking up arcs of dust that glittered in the sun like ground glass. Talon led them, reins slack, eyes sharp. He didn't look angry, he looked sure. The kind of sure that comes from being the voice of 100 years of rules. When they stopped, the oldest among them, an elder woman wrapped in ochre cloth, her gray hair braided with bones, spoke first. Her English was thick but steady. "You brought shame to our council, Nara." Nara didn't bow. "I brought choice," she said quietly. The woman's gaze slid to Elias. "This is your man." Elias tried to meet her stare, and found it heavier than any gun barrel he'd ever faced. "I'm not hers," he said before he could stop himself. "We're not." Nara's hand touched his arm, stopping him. "You are what you choose," she whispered. The elder's eyes narrowed. "Then choose now," she said. "Before the sun climbs higher." Elias felt the weight of every silence he'd ever carried pressing on his ribs. He wanted to say no, to tell them all. This wasn't his fight, that he was just a man who fixed fences and fed his horse and tried to stay unseen. But the moment he looked at Nara, he knew that lie had died days ago. He straightened. "If she stands with me, I stand with her." Talon dismounted. The sand shifted under his boots like a living thing. "Then stand," he said. "Let us see if you can hold ground when it trembles." The others stepped back, forming a half circle around them. The elder woman watched with arms folded tight. Nara's hand hovered near her blade, but Talon shook his head. "No steel," he said. "No blood, just truth." He approached Elias until only inches separated them. The difference between them was a study in contrasts. Talon's body carved from tension and training, Elias's from years of work and quiet endurance. The air between them pulsed with something older than both. Talon's voice dropped low. "You think you can carry her spirit?" Elias didn't answer. She was promised to a man who leads warriors, who kills to protect his people. What do, farmer? Elias's jaw clenched. I build things. Talon's mouth twitched, a mock smile. Then build yourself into something worth choosing. He shoved Elias backward, hard. Elias stumbled, caught himself on the edge of the porch. His heart thundered, but he stayed upright. Talon stalked forward again, voice rising. Show them. Show her. Or admit you are only what I see, soft hands and frightened eyes. Elias's blood burned. Something in him, long dormant, snapped taut. He took a step closer until he could smell dust and horse sweat and the faint metallic tang of the knife still hanging from Talon's belt. I don't have to break something to prove it's strong, he said, his voice shaking but clear. And you don't have to fear what's quiet to know it's alive. The words hit the air like iron striking flint. Talon's eyes flickered, not anger now, but surprise. The elder woman muttered something in Apache under her breath, sharp and short, like a prayer cut in half. Nara's chest rose and fell, fast. She didn't move, but her eyes were wet. Talon stepped back one pace, and the stillness between them turned razor sharp. Then he lunged, not with his fists this time, with speed. His hand shot out, grabbed Elias's shirt, yanked him off balance. Elias's boots scraped across the dirt. He expected the blow, braced for it, but it didn't come. Instead, Talon's grip tightened, dragging him close until their foreheads almost touched. You won't flinch? Talon hissed. Not from you. The words came before thought, and then, like a fuse cut short, the energy bled away. Talon's hand opened. He stepped back, chest heaving. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the dry rustle of wind over the grass. Finally, the elder spoke. He did not bow, he did not strike. She turned to Nara. That makes him both fool and brave. Perhaps the right mixture for you. Talon's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. His eyes slid to Nara, then to Elias, and finally to the horizon. They will not forgive this, he said quietly. If you go through with it, you will not come back. Nara answered him in Apache, her tone calm, resolute. The elder nodded once, then turned her horse. The others followed, the sound of hooves fading into the long wind. Only Talon lingered. He looked back once, eyes no longer hard, just sad. When the child comes, teach it to listen, he said softly. Even the storm has lessons. Then he mounted and rode after the others, leaving only dust in his wake. Elias exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. His legs shook, and he dropped to sit on the edge of the porch, head in his hands. Nara knelt beside him. You didn't flinch, she said again. I was too scared to. That's why it mattered. She reached for his hands, holding them between hers. The tremor in his fingers betrayed everything words couldn't. You understand now, she whispered. Courage isn't loud. It's the moment you choose not to run. He met her gaze. And what do we do now? Her voice was barely a breath. Now we face the full moon. That night, the sky burned silver. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and something electric, alive. Inside the cabin, the lamp flickered low, and the world outside vanished into shadow. They spoke little. Words had become too fragile for what needed to happen. Nara's voice broke the silence first. In my tribe, binding isn't done with words or rings. It's done with choice. You choose once and forever. There is no unbinding. Elias stared at the flame, watching it tremble. And if we're wrong, then we carry the mistake together. He turned to her, saw her eyes reflecting firelight like molten amber. I don't think you are wrong, he said quietly. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole face, like something inside had unclenched. Then she rose and extended her hand. Come with me. Outside, the desert was awash in moonlight. The sand shimmered like frost. The world was silent except for the faint sigh of the wind through the dry grass. They stood together on the ridge, two silhouettes carved from shadow and light. The moon hung full above them, round, watching, waiting. This is where I was born, Nara said softly, and if the spirits allow, where our child will begin. Elias felt something break open in his chest, grief, hope, everything tangled together. Then let them see us. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. Once we do this, There is no going back. I don't want back, he said. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched, until he could feel her breath tremble against his lips. The world shrank to heartbeat and light, to the taste of dust and salt and something sacred. When she spoke, it was a whisper that sounded like prayer. Then let the storm remember. And under that wide, merciless sky, they chose each other not because it was safe, but because it was terrifying and true. By dawn, the wind had shifted again. The land felt changed, washed clean, rearranged. Inside the cabin, the scent of smoke and warmth lingered. Nara slept beside him, her hand resting over his chest, her breathing steady as tidewater. Elias stared at the ceiling and realized he wasn't afraid anymore. Not of her, not of the world, not of being seen. He'd spent 3 years building walls so thick even God couldn't hear him. She had torn them down with 6 words and a storm. And somewhere outside, beyond the ridge, Talon was already riding toward the council to deliver whatever verdict the world would try to force upon them. But for the first time in his life, Elias Monroe didn't care what the world decided. Because in this place, with this woman, he'd already decided for himself. Dawn broke slow, turning the sky into soft copper. The wind had gone quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath after the night's decision. Inside the cabin, Elias sat at the table sharpening his knife, not out of need, but out of habit. Each scrape of steel against stone gave rhythm to a heart that no longer knew what came next. Behind him, Nara moved softly, wrapping her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her face, usually carved from purpose, had softened. She looked almost human now, not the warrior who had challenged an entire council, but a woman who'd chosen a life without permission. They will come, she said, her voice even. Today, or the next. They'll want to see if I'm still who I was. Elias stopped the blade mid-stroke. And if they take you back? She turned to him with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then I'll go, but they'll have to take me alive. The words chilled him. He'd seen what men did when they thought they were righteous. You don't have to fight them alone. Nara walked over, rested her hand on his. You've already fought beside me. You just didn't use a weapon. Her touch lingered longer than the words. Outside, the horizon shimmered heat, or dust, or both. Elias couldn't tell anymore. He stood, moving toward the door, scanning the line of ridges to the north. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. She stepped up beside him, her hand slipping into his. You won't. Even if they take me, you won't. The air shifted. He could smell horses. The faint jingle of bridles carried on the wind. They're here, Nara murmured. 5 figures crested the ridge, the same council riders from the day before, but this time, no formation, no ceremony. They came without haste, almost slow, like people returning to a place they didn't quite know how to face. The elder woman dismounted first. Talon followed, his head bowed, reins dangling loose in his hand. Nara's body tensed, but Elias felt no fear. Something in the air had changed, not the promise of violence, but something quieter, a reckoning. The elder spoke first. The council met through the night, she said. We argued until our throats cracked. Some said you betrayed us. Some said you reminded us what we lost. Her eyes found Elias. You were a soldier once. He nodded. A long time ago. She studied him a moment. You've killed. Yes. And now? Elias hesitated. Now I grow things. I mend what's broken. A ghost of approval flickered across her face. Perhaps that is harder. She turned to Nara. Talon told us what happened. How you chose, and why. He told us the quiet man did not flinch. The memory hit Elias like a wave. The trembling fist an inch from his face. The sound of his own heartbeat louder than thunder. He said nothing. The elder drew a breath. The council will not hunt you. The child you carry will belong to both peoples. If you both swear it will learn our tongue, our stories, our prayers. Nara's lips parted. The child. She stopped, then looked down, hand instinctively resting on her stomach. Elias froze. You? She met his eyes, and he saw it there, quiet certainty, fragile and unstoppable. I felt it this morning, she whispered. The new life, like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to me yet. Elias's breath caught. For the first time in years, the future had shape. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. The elder reached into her saddlebag, drew out a small beaded bracelet. She handed it to Nara. This was your grandmother's. She believed peace could only live in those who dared to love across hatred. She died before we learned she was right. Nara took it with trembling hands. Thank you. The elder nodded once. Keep the land between you strong. Teach your child both names. She turned to Talon. And you? Talon looked at Elias, his gaze stripped of contempt. He stood when he could have run. That's all I need to know. Then quieter, take care of her spirit, farmer. It's worth more than the world will ever give you credit for. He swung onto his horse and started toward the ridge. The elder and the others followed, dust rising behind them like closing wings. When they were gone, the silence fell thick and strange. Nara still stood clutching the bracelet. Elias reached for her hand, curling it around his own. You're sure? He asked, voice unsteady. Her smile was faint but full of light. About us? About everything. She looked at him for a long moment, then pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heartbeat. I've never been more sure. They stood like that until the horizon swallowed the last trace of the riders. Then Elias took her hand, led her back inside. The cabin, once cold and hollow, felt different now, alive, inhabited. The air carried the scent of dust, smoke, and something new, the faint sweetness of a beginning. Elias sat at the table, and Nara placed the bracelet in his palm. This is your promise now, she said. To me, to our child, to the land that brought us together. He turned the bracelet over, the beads warm from her skin. What does it mean? It means you will listen even when the world shouts. 1. He slipped it onto his wrist and felt the weight of it light, but unyielding. A circle, unbroken. Outside, the wind stirred again, soft and patient. The world didn't look any kinder, but it finally looked possible. Elias reached for Nara's hand. Then let's begin. And for the first time since the war, he felt alive not because he'd survived, but because he'd chosen to live. Weeks passed. The land began to heal itself, as if taking its cue from them. The storms came and went, carving new ridges into the sand, smoothing the scars from the last one. The fields Elias had left fallow for years began to stir again, not yet green, but restless, ready. He built a small fence around the south pasture, not to keep anything out, but to mark what was theirs. Every post driven into the soil felt like a heartbeat. Every plank nailed in place felt like a vow. Nara moved slower now, her hand often resting against her stomach without her realizing it. She still carried her knife, still rode her mare at dawn to scout the horizon, but when she returned, she always stopped by the fence line to find him as if she needed to see him there, working, existing, choosing this life again and again. Sometimes, she would sit in the shade and watch him mend wire, her voice drifting on the wind. She told him the old songs, the ones her people used to sing when they planted corn, when they prayed for rain, when they mourned their dead. Elias didn't understand the words, but he learned the rhythm. The rhythm was enough. In the evenings, they would light the fire and eat in silence. Not the old silence, the one that had once felt like punishment, but a softer one, born from trust. One night, as the fire burned low, Nara leaned against him, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you still dream of the war? Elias nodded. Sometimes. And now? She asked. What do you see? He looked into the fire. You. And the child. And a house that doesn't creak when the wind blows. She smiled faintly, tracing the edge of his jaw with her thumb. Then maybe the world forgave us after all. He shook his head. No. But maybe it doesn't have to. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing across the roof he'd rebuilt, with her hand steadying the ladder. It held strong. Elias closed his eyes and listened to the sound, not of fear, not of loneliness, but of life continuing, of courage that no longer needed to shout. When he opened them, Nara was asleep against his shoulder, the firelight painting her face in copper and gold. He looked at her, the woman who had ridden into his solitude with 6 impossible words and changed everything. Tomorrow would bring more storms. The land would test them again. The world would whisper its doubts. But Elias Monroe was done hiding. He would meet every storm the same way he met her, standing steady, eyes open, afraid but unyielding. Because in the end, the quiet man and the wild woman had built something louder than fear. Something the desert itself would remember.